If you want to get further in life, whether it's in property investment, in business, as an entrepreneur, just with your money, you're going to need mentors. And today I'm going to share with you some lessons from one of my mentors, Warren Buffett. I'm also going to teach you what Faux Beau is. Not FOMO, but you'll find out when you listen, and we'll have a talk about the difference between successful and unsuccessful people. So lots of lessons in today's show. Welcome to this week's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator, who has once again been voted our leading expert in wealth creation. That's the 5th time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
There's a famous quote that says, "Only a fool learns from his own mistakes. The wise man learns from the mistakes of others." Now, my career changed, my success changed when I realised I don't have to know everything, when I realised the power of mentors. And since then, I've always sought out mentors to help ensure my success. And I've always been willing to be taught, and I've always been willing to ask lots of questions. Now, today, grabbing a mentor is much easier than ever. Now, that's a good and a bad thing. This easy access means you can get too much information from too many sources, resulting in conflict and doubt. So, when you choose a mentor, be selective. Be careful who you commit to. Today, I'm going to share with you the lessons I've learned from one of my mentors, Warren Buffett. Now, one of the mistakes I made early on is I didn't actually reach up high enough on the food chain of mentors, because if I did, I would have been further along with my success earlier. On the top of the ladder, though, of course, is Warren Buffett, who's helped me avoid many investing mistakes. Now, that's interesting, of course, because I've never really met Warren Buffett in person and he doesn't even know me. But I feel I know him because I've dedicated myself to learning everything about him. Now, I can study Warren Buffett without going to Omaha by simply reading his books, watching his interviews, reading his material. Now, a mentor is defined as an experienced and trusted advisor. So based on that definition, the first prerequisite of a mentor is somebody you can trust. And for you to trust them, you must do some research on who that person really is. And if you don't do the research on the person, you won't be able to fully trust them. So just because somebody's got some ads on the television or fancy videos on the internet doesn't mean they're the right mentor for you. Now, that's a whole different story, and I guess you know I've been running a mentorship program for over 12 years now at michaelyardney.com.au, but today I'm actually going to teach you about one of my mentors, Warren Buffett. In today's show, I'm also going to explain to you about Fobo. Not FOMO, the fear of missing out, but when we have a chat with Ahmad Imam, Director of Metropole in Sydney, he'll explain to us about Fobo. And in my mindset message, I'm going to share the difference between successful and unsuccessful people. So let's get on with the show. Have you been looking for a great property mentor? Now, I remember in my early investing career, when I was looking for a mentor, I found the perfect one. I was mentored by Warren Buffett. In fact, Warren's been mentoring me for quite some time now, and it's been inspiring. But I've got to be honest, I've actually never spoken to him, and he's never called me, he's never emailed me. And Warren Buffett's probably not even a real property expert, but you'd have to agree that he's the greatest investor of our time, maybe of all time. And he's generously created a means for me to get inside his head and learn how he thinks about investing. Fortunately, we've all got access to Warren's thoughts through his many clever quotes and his musings. I think he's probably the most quoted investor of all time. And we've got access to his way of thinking through his annual letter to the shareholders of his company, Berkshire Hathaway. One of my early lessons I learned from my mentor was be greedy when others are fearful. You know, like now. He said, be greedy when others are fearful and be fearful when others are greedy. Now, I'm sure you've read this quote before, but before you think, oh, no, I'm not going to pay any more attention to this, you probably think you fully understand the meaning of it, can I suggest you take the time to listen on as I explain my thoughts, because they've changed over the years. You see, initially I took Warren Buffett's words literally and thought I had to buy counter-cyclically. But I was wrong. You see, I did some research and I found the origins of this well-worn quote, and I learned that Buffett actually suggested that to profit in the market, you don't really have to predict the downturns. Of course, that's not how I initially understood his words. So I read his 1986 annual letter to shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway, and this is what he said. What we do know, however, is that occasional breakouts of the two super contagious diseases, fear and greed, will forever occur in the investment community. The timing of these epidemics will be unpredictable. And then Buffett went on to say, and the market aberrations produced by them will be equally unpredictable, both as to duration and degree. Therefore, we never try to anticipate the arrival or departure of either disease. Our goal is more modest. We simply attempt to be fearful when others are greedy and to be greedy when others are fearful. So now that I saw the true context, here are the 3 lessons I took from his words. The first lesson was fear and greed, amongst lots of other factors, drive our markets and cause them to cycle. And if you haven't noticed, all too often, too far in both directions, both in the upside when people are greedy and on the downside when people are fearful. The market cycles sometimes too much. The second lesson I learned was trying to predict these markets is a fool's game. Evidence is overwhelming that we know much less than we think we do. Even when we're armed with all the data, all the reports, the experts can't pick the top and bottom of the cycle. And the third lesson I learned was, as an investor, you simply need to know that these cycles keep recurring and be prepared rather than surprised, and not to overreact, because when emotions affect our investment decisions, this clouds our judgment, and even the most rational person, the most rational investor, tends to act irrationally. But here's the problem. Your psychology and your instincts will try their best to persuade you not to act counterintuitively. Reading and agreeing with my mentor is worlds apart from acting like him when faced with a situation like some investors are at present, where there's so much negative talk in the media. For example, many investors currently are finding it hard to feel greedy when there's all those negative headlines and the property pessimists are out there. My advice to them would be to understand that the property market's behaving normally. We've experienced a number of consecutive years of booming property markets, especially in Sydney and Melbourne, and now the cycle's moved on to the next phase. The market's behaving normally. It's catching its breath in some locations, it's falling in value a little bit in certain locations, and it's holding firm in others. And if you're a homeowner, or if you're an investor with a long-term perspective, and if you're an investor, that's really the only way you should be, if you're not planning to buy or sell in the near future, these market ups and downs really shouldn't worry you at all. On the other hand, if you're planning to buy, don't try and predict the bottom. Instead, be prepared. If you truly want to be greedy when everyone else is fearful, then get your finances in place and have a strategy that's market tested. You see, my view on this lesson has changed over the years. The lesson I initially took from my mentor was that understanding the recurring relationships between the different stages of the market cycle was critical. I thought it was really important to understand this market cycles to maximize my returns and to minimize my exposure, minimize my risk. And when I first learned this lesson, it made sense. If you know where things are heading and buy before the crowd does, before prices start to rise strongly, you're likely to make big profits. But over time, I realised that wasn't always the case. In fact, if you wait for the right opportunity counter-cyclically, you're often going to be left behind. So I'm actually not such a big believer in counter-cyclical investing, because I realised timing is one of the most misunderstood concepts with regards to property investing. The truth is, successful investors know how to create wealth at any point in the cycle. Sure, timing matters. Of course you don't want to buy a property right at the peak of the boom just to wait 3 or 4 years to see its value start rising again. But successful investors find that timing isn't really that important. I don't know, have you noticed how some investors seem to do well in good times and do even better in bad times? Market timing really doesn't seem important to them. On the other hand, Other investors do poorly in good times, and they do even worse in bad times. Market timing seems to have little effect on them either. Now that's interesting, isn't it? So what is it that differentiates that small group of successful investors from the crowd? The fact that at the same stage of the property cycle, successful investors manage to make money while unsuccessful investors lose money suggests it's not the external world that determines whether we make or lose money. It's something inside us. And I know some people would argue that it's knowledge that differentiates these two classes of investors. But I don't think that's quite right. Sure, successful investors have a level of knowledge and financial fluency that the average investor lacks. Yet knowledge alone doesn't make them successful investors. However, what allows some people to become super successful investors is their mindset, the way they think about money, the way they think about wealth. Now, of course, that's one of the reasons I have a mindset moment in almost all of my podcasts. Now, let me put it to you a different way. In his book, A Tale of Two Cities, Charles Dickens famously wrote, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness." Now, amazingly, things don't seem to have changed much since Dickens wrote this in 1859. For some people, the current stage of the property cycle makes it the best of times. For these savvy investors, the current times are an opportunity to buy top-class property assets that are going to help them have their financial future, get themselves set for their financial future. And these people see abundance. For others, it's the worst of times. Some only see negatives in the media, property prices tumbling, when in reality they've only dropped 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%. That's not tumbling. They see the negatives, that the banks are tightening the screws on property investors, or there's lower or no capital growth for a period of time. Unfortunately, others are saddled with investment debts secured against the wrong type of investment property, ones with limited capital growth. Maybe they weren't even investment properties, or they weren't investment grade in the first place. Of course, all these people don't see the available opportunities. They don't see abundance. They see scarcity. They feel fear. I think what I'm trying to say is that you need more than knowledge and facts. As I've explained, knowledge alone won't secure your success. I've seen some very knowledgeable people make some foolish investment decisions. Interestingly, while some investors are still getting in the game at this stage of the property cycle and buying great investment properties to secure their future, others are waiting for the timing to be perfect. Look, only a while ago I caught up with Ben, who's been waiting for, believe it or not, 10 years for the timing to be just right to start investing. Of course, the timing's not going to ever be just right. There's always going to be challenges, situations, circumstances, obstacles, fears, doubts, and things that you're going to have to overcome. The timing is never going to be perfect. Now, 10 years ago, Ben saw some obstacles and didn't get into property investment. If he did, chances are if he bought a well-located capital city property, it would, close to doubled in value by now. Even if he paid a little bit too much, even if he bought at the wrong time of the cycle. You see, wealth is attracted to people who are decisive and committed. If you're waiting for the timing to be perfect, the timing will never be perfect for you. Currently, property investors are being given some great opportunities to buy properties as the markets have slowed a little. They're not at the frenetic pace that they were before. In many locations, we're in a buyer's market. I know personally I'm adding to my portfolio, as I did last year, and interestingly, the year before. Now, let me share another concept with you. It's the concept of when to versus how to investments. Now, I know many advisors recommend when to investments, which means you've got to know when to buy and, in many cases, when to sell. The problem is that timing's critical for these investments. If you buy low and sell high, you do well. However, if you get your timing wrong, your money can be wiped out. When to investments include shares, commodities, futures, and also chasing hotspots, trying to time the property market. That's a when to investment. I would rather put my money into how to investments, such as well-located, established capital city real estate, the sort that increases in value steadily and doesn't have the wild variations, fluctuations in price. Yet it's still powerful enough to generate wealth-producing rates of return through the benefits of leverage. And of course, during this more flat time of the market cycle, I like creating my own property growth. I manufacture capital growth by doing renovations, by doing developments. So, of course, while timing is still important in how to investments, It's nowhere near as important as how well you buy and how you add value. How to investments, interestingly, are rarely liquid but produce great wealth, while most when-to investments produce only a handful of large winners. Unfortunately, they tend to create lots of losers. On the other hand, investing in well-located capital city residential real estate produces many wealthy people. Homeowners. They're not even investors, but they are really, because their wealth is going up that way. And of course, investors. And it produces a handful of losers, those who don't buy the right sort of properties. Now, I want to give you one final lesson that I learned from my mentor. And that lesson is there's always a right time for advice. So if you're looking for independent advice, let me give you a shameless plug. No one can quite help you like the independent property strategists at Metropole. Remember, we've got no properties for sale, but our team's been involved in over $3 billion worth of property transactions over 5 property cycles. And because we've got no properties for sale, our advice is unbiased. So whether you're a beginner or a seasoned property investor, we'd love to help you formulate an investment strategy or do a review on your existing portfolio and help you get to the next level. For some clients, all we're going to recommend is buy a $29 book. We'll actually probably give you one. For others, you may need a strategic portfolio review, which we give you a whole lot of different scenarios, including a finance strategy and a property strategy. Others just are right to go to our home buyers or property investment buyers agents. Having said that, there's no one size fits all, so therefore we'll give you a personalised property strategy if that's what you want, if that's what you need. So why not go to metropole.com.au and find out what we can do to help you, or just dial 1300 Metropole. Now, in a moment, I'm going to share my mindset moment with you about some of the big differences between the successful and unsuccessful people. I guess because I want you to become more successful. And we're also going to have a chat with Ahmad Imam about Fobo, something you should know about. But before we get onto that, I just want to remind you that I'm currently preparing for our one-day trainings around Australia. So if you're wanting to thrive, not just survive in 2019 in this very, very different property market, I recommend you join me at my annual one-day property market and economic updates. Now, they're in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, and as a subscriber to my podcast, you can come for free when other people pay $99. So I want to teach you the lessons from the past. I want to teach you how to invest in uncertain times like this. I'm going to teach you the new rules for the current market, what you can do to avoid the pitfalls ahead, and how to position yourself for maximum property profits. Because there's a whole heap of new emerging trends. You see, I think if people haven't changed their way of thinking about property, they're going to be left behind. And I'm going to be joined by Dr. Andrew Wilson, Australia's most respected and impartial property economist, and Ken Race, who advises high net worth individuals and their families, professionals and business owners about tax and structuring and estate planning. Now, collectively, the three of us have had over 120 years of property experience. You're not going to get that anywhere else. And so this is different to a podcast. It's intense training. By the way, we've got no properties for sale, so you should join us. There'll be a link in the show notes, but go to propertymarketupdate.com.au. Use the coupon code podcast so you can come along. When you do, you're going to learn how to avoid the pitfalls, the ones that always occur at this stage of the property cycle. If you're a little bit confused and require clarity on what's ahead, you're going to come out with much more clarity. And if you're determined to use property as your wealth creation vehicle, you really must join us so that you know what to do at this stage. Because times are changing, the market's moved on to the next stage, and in my mind there are more traps and landmines along the way than there have been for many, many years. So now's the time to protect your assets, but also secure your future. Why not learn from experts who've been there, done that, been around the block a few times? We'll teach you lessons that are going to help you predict your future so you can thrive in these times while other people are going to sit on the sidelines. There are so many mixed messages out there. Come along and join us at propertymarketupdate.com.au. Use the coupon code podcast, reserve your seat, and when you come along there's a whole heap of bonuses for you as well. I look forward to catching up with you as my guest.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
Have you ever thought about the traits, the values and the differences between successful and unsuccessful people? It may seem obvious. Successful people are, well, successful. But they're actually more than that. They're confident, they're polished, they're assertive. That's why each week in my Mindset Moment, we spend some time working out what the habits of the rich people are, the successful people are, so that you can learn to develop more of these rich habits and get rid of some of your unproductive, your poor habits. So today I'd like to spend a couple of moments speaking about some of the ways successful people differ from unsuccessful people. And the first way is successful people embrace change, while the average person tends to fear it. Now, this can be hard to do. Uncertainty doesn't gel well with the human spirit. However, in the current times of technology and business and even in our real estate market, things are evolving daily, and those who can grasp and manipulate the change to their advantage are undoubtedly going to become more successful. And I'm getting older and I'm just realizing that the world's growing at an accelerated pace, and those who choose to embrace it rather than fear it and hide from these changes, those who learn how to harness these changes to their advantage, they're the ones who are going to be more successful. Another trait of successful people is that they talk and share and encourage ideas with other people, while unsuccessful people, they tend to talk about other people. So successful people are idea sharers, and they sort of have the concept that two heads are better than one, and they bounce ideas off each other. But yet the poor people, the unsuccessful people, just get too easily consumed by and talk about others. They gossip. They spend their time focusing on the perceived failures of others rather than benefiting from seeing how other people have been successful, how they've progressed. Another big difference between the successful and unsuccessful people is that they take responsibility for their failures, while the average person seeks to blame others. Now, if you haven't listened to episode 1 of the Michael Yardney podcast, go right back to that, where I teach you about how to be the pilot of your life rather than the passenger, to take responsibility. Truly successful people still experience ups and downs in their life, but one thing's clear: they actually accept responsibility for their actions, both their failures and their successes. They realise that no good ever comes from blaming others. I've often said there's no such thing as a rich victim. The fourth trait of successful people is they give others credit, while I've found that unsuccessful people like to take the credit themselves. That's a big, big difference. Allowing your team members, others, to have their moment in the sun to shine is a really effective management tool if you're a team leader as well. That's why successful people are more than happy to share the praise around with others. Those who don't have a positive, abundant mindset, they seem to take the opposite approach and will greedily hog all the credit for themselves, failing to see the good that others have shared. Another big difference between the successful and the average person is that successful people take pride in, and they actually want others to succeed. Now, that's not the way the average person thinks. They actually, what's that tall poppy syndrome, and they knock other people who've succeeded. And the last trait, there's lots and lots of different traits of successful people, but the last trait I'd like to just quickly mention to you today in this mentorship moment is successful people are continuously learning. Why do you ask? They're already successful? Well, because they know that there's always new opportunities that are going to allow them to pivot, to grow, to adapt, to improve in all sorts of ways. So whether you're a property investor, a business person, an entrepreneur, you've got to be continuously learning. You'll find that as a trait amongst all this wealthy people. They set time aside specifically to read for an hour or two, to learn things. They still have mentors. They still pay for courses. They are part of mastermind groups. So you can always keep learning. Successful people have lots of different traits to ensure that they achieve ongoing success, to ensure they achieve their goals. So be happy within yourself, share your wins and experiences, be giving of your knowledge, but have the drive to go out there and get it done, because that's going to help you stand out from the pack. If you want some help with this, if you want to have a mentor to help you move forward, have a look at my 12-month mentorship program. You'll find all the details at michaelyardney.com. For over a decade, I've mentored about 2,000 people now and seen some amazing transformations or success. michaelyardney.com.au. You'll find out all about my mentorship program. Now, we've all heard of FOMO, that clever acronym short for fear of missing out. And boy, did we see a lot of that over the last couple of years, particularly in the Melbourne and Sydney property markets when those markets were booming. But today, there's a new acronym people are using, and it's Fobo. Have you heard of that? Now, I hadn't before, but I'm going to have a chat with Ahmad Imam, the Director of Metropole Properties in Sydney, to explain what it's all about. So welcome, Ahmad.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
Now, of course, we saw a lot of FOMO before when people were buying secondary properties, any sort of property on a main road, whatever, just to get in. I bet you saw a lot of that over the last couple of years in Sydney.
Yeah, the last 5 years especially, when we saw unbelievable levels of growth, unsustainable levels of growth, but people were rushing into the market. They certainly had a fear of missing out. They were buying anything and everything. But as you know, Michael, it leads to a lack of due diligence, a lack of planning, and a lot of people make some costly mistakes.
Well, I guess a lot of it was emotional purchase, and we know that when you're making emotional decisions, rationalization sort of goes out the door. And that's one of the problems with us as humans. When emotions come into play, we behave irrationally, but it swings both ways. So tell us, what's this Fobo?
Well, there's actually a fear that you and I would see quite often with our clients. And it's something that a lot of our clients suffer from, especially now as we transition into a different stage of the property cycle. And that is Fobo. It's actually the complete opposite of FOMO. So Fobo is short form for fear of better options. Okay. So people that have a Fobo or fear of better options are those that are constantly procrastinating because they feel that there's many options out there and they don't quite know which option is the best one for them. And as a result, there's a serious lack of commitment.
Well, we've seen that in the past. I guess sometimes it used to be called paralysis by analysis, where even in the top markets, people missed out. And one of the things I learned many years ago is if you buy the right sort of property in the right location, sure, you may not get the timing right, but over time, look at those people who bought after the global financial crisis, who, when everyone else said it was a silly time, look at all those people who bought in Sydney in 2002, 3, 4, when the market was flat for a period of time, and where we are today, and I guess all over Australia. So how do you know if you're suffering from Fobo?
Well, there's a few symptoms, I would say, if I can call it that. You'd have, just like you mentioned, a severe case of analysis paralysis. You're constantly analyzing things and it's leading to a state of paralysis. You're not doing anything. You're not progressing. You're not moving forward. You feel overwhelmed by all the information and choices. And we all know that there is so much information out there and it's very overwhelming because you don't quite know which information to use. You don't quite know who to trust. You then feel a lot of self-doubt because you lose a bit of confidence in not knowing what to believe. And as you know, Michael, the more you learn, the more you realize how much you actually don't know. And that's certainly the case with property. But the thought of buyer's remorse creates a lot of anxiety for you. And the biggest telltale sign is you get cold feet whenever you're on the verge of making an important decision. And that's what leads a lot of people to not making any decision at all.
Now, one of the problems I've found is when you have so much information, what people don't have is perspective. So you can do research on the internet. You can work out your local market by going to open for inspections, by seeing what sells, what doesn't sell, how auction clearance rates are, days on market stock. But the trouble these people have, I believe, Ahmad, is knowing which of those are important, how much emphasis to put on each. And so they seem to put undue emphasis on some of the things that you and I, with a level of experience, wouldn't take as seriously.
Absolutely. And I think perspective is probably the best way to sum that up. I'm a property strategist. My role is to coach people on how to create wealth through property. But one thing I found interesting, Michael, and it's something that you can certainly relate to, is that most successful investors are usually not the most analytical or detail oriented. The most successful investors that I found are simply the ones that are the most decisive. And you can be both analytical and decisive, and that is certainly the perfect combination. Because that means that you can do your due diligence, you can analyze the options, but you're also able to pull the trigger when you need to, which is very, very important. However, it's usually the analytical thinkers and the detail-oriented clients who suffer from Fobo the most, I find. Do you find that as well, Michael?
Well, I'm sure you've heard me say at seminars, hand up the intelligent people in the room, hands up the analytical people in the room. And then I say, guys, you're in trouble. Because I know, Ahmad, that our system of growing wealth through property is too simple for many intelligent people. They think there's got to be more to it than that, and there isn't. That's right. And you're not being facetious when you say that. It just sometimes being too analytical can work against you, especially in property. It's the analytical thinkers that are the ones that procrastinate the most. They're also the ones that are, usually absolutely struggling to make a decision. They're usually the clients that come prepared to see me with detailed spreadsheets, populated with all sorts of formulas and projections. And Michael, they project the growth and performance of their investments, the ongoing costs, the cash flow, the net worth, and they use a number of formulas to determine their financial position in 20, 30 years. But you and I both know that you can't work with projections in property because life doesn't work that way. Life has a funny habit of throwing things at you when you least expect it. And the best thing to do is actually have the ability to be able to adapt to that. So the reason that those that suffer from Fobo struggle to make a decision is because they're on this endless pursuit to find the best option or the perfect option. Now, clearly, we're not saying don't do analysis. Clearly, we're not saying don't do research. It's really, really important to have a combination, as you said before, of the big picture and the detail. But the next thing is actually to take action. And I think one of the ways to take action is recognizing you won't know it all, but that in fact, over time, you will know enough to start taking action and find out more along the way. I know some people come to us, they've been elsewhere, and they've got 40-year spreadsheets about when they can buy the next property, when they can buy the next latte, when they can actually have a baby. You can't plan that far ahead. We don't know when the next election is going to be, who the next prime minister is going to be, what's going to happen to interest rates. So yes, it is important to put assumptions. And for our clients, we actually do detailed strategic property plans with spreadsheets. But we give a number of analyses, but I think the most important thing is to understand that they're not firm, they're not fixed, and it's important to have a number of scenarios, and it's important to regularly review them to see how the world's moving on. Absolutely, and I'm certainly not saying that you shouldn't be analytical. Knowing how to review certain options and knowing what criteria to work off is very important. But if you're on this hunt and this pursuit for the best option or the perfect option, you're going to soon realize that you'll get into a habit where you feel that no option is actually good enough. And that's very dangerous. And that's how you get stuck in this Fobo, so to speak. You end up trapped in this vicious cycle of analysis and then procrastination and then regret, because along the way, you actually have multiple opportunities that pass you by. And more importantly, time passes you by. And that's the biggest luxury we have. Well, it is, and it's one of the things that helps you grow your wealth. But interestingly, it's not just about property, because every year there are world crises, whether it's local in Australia, like political crises, whether it's overseas, whether it's war, whether it's economic. I've kept a track of it, and some of them are well known. But I think on top of that, every year there's an X factor, something out of the blue, sometimes to the positive, like the China boom that actually fed our mining boom a number of years ago. So some are for the positive and some are for the negative, like other international problems like the global financial crisis or the debt crisis that happened overseas. So I think you're fooling yourself if you think you know everything, and it's one of the issues about property, in my mind, is it's actually very forgiving, and it doesn't fluctuate in price as much if you own the right sort of property as in the share market. So, okay, we know that some people suffer from this, and we can understand that the media feeds it. The media loves negative sentiment. It loves clickbait. So it's even harder than ever today. So is there a cure for this, Ahmad?
Yeah, of course. So there is a cure, and it's actually relatively simple, probably easier said than done. But one, you have to do your research and you have to do your due diligence. As we were saying, we're not saying don't be analytical. Just know when to be analytical and when to be able to pull the trigger. So you have to do your research. If you don't know how to do your research, obviously engage people that can to get an understanding of what criteria to use to work off. And that's what leads to that perspective we were referring to. The next thing is very important. It's to make sure that you don't procrastinate, to make sure that you don't stay on this journey of looking for better options. And that is set a time limit or a deadline by which your research and your due diligence must be accomplished. Whether that's 2 months or 3 months or 6 months, I probably wouldn't go longer than 6 months. But you just want to make sure that you have that time limit there so you know, okay, I've done my due diligence, I've done my research, now let's proceed with the better option. The third one, Michael, is be decisive. If you've done your due diligence for 6 months, you've done your research for 6 months, that's a lot of research you've done there. So make a decision. And I know the third one is easier said than done because some people are simply not decisive. But the fact of the matter is, if you suffer from Fobo, then you need to acknowledge that you suffer from Fobo. And if you wish to be a successful investor, yet you have the inability to be decisive, then you have to engage an expert in the field who can be decisive for you.
Now, that's a really, really good point. If you can't do it yourself, hang around people who can, and not your friends and your mates who are probably not. Everyone knows a bit about property. Everyone thinks they know about property, but in this market, get a good team on your side. Now, I know some people will say that's self-serving, but a large part of what our job at Metropole is actually not just to buy good property and not just to help our clients negotiate and not be taken advantage of by the selling agent, but it's to stop them making the mistakes that we see them make over and over again because they buy emotionally.
Agreed. Yep.
So in summary, there is a time and place for it to be analytical, and there's also a time to take action. So if you suffer from Fobo, have a think about how you can gain perspective by either doing the homework and the research or getting somebody to do it. Don't be arrogant and think that you can, in 3 months over the internet, do research that's going to give you the same experience as somebody like the team at Metropole who've been on the ground and done 4 or 5 property deals a year for 20 years. So get a good team on your side. Ahmad, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure.
We covered a lot in today's show. If you enjoyed it, do you subscribe to my daily property update newsletter where we have a whole lot of experts talk about success, money and property? So go to propertyupdate.com.au and subscribe to the daily blog. I almost said podcast. It's not a daily podcast, but it's a daily blog and a weekly podcast at propertyupdate.com.au. And if you did enjoy the show, why not share it with somebody? I know some people enjoyed the show because I keep getting reviews every week, and I want to read out 2 today. And if this is you, then please write into me at michael@metropole.com.au and I'll gift you one of my books. You can choose which. And by the way, if you haven't put a review yet in iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen, please do so. And when I read it out, I'll gift you a book as well. But the first one today came from B. Best One, who says, "Thanks, Michael, for your insightful and informative podcast. I'm a property investor myself and in the construction development industry, but I still pick up useful tips each week. Thank you for your work. Really appreciate it and so worthwhile." Well, thank you so much for writing those kind words. And Jared Bromley wrote, "Thank you for always providing such valuable property investment advice. You get straight to the point and I've learned a lot. I'm always looking forward to the next episode coming out." Well, I look forward to bringing one out again for you each week, Jared. So, guys, if you'd like to email me at michael@metropole.com.au, tell me which one of my books you'd like. I'll autograph it for you and put it in the mail. And I look forward to bringing you another episode of the Michael Yardney podcast next week.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth through strategic property advice. If you got value from today's show, we'd really appreciate it if you would leave a review, and we'll read it out on a future show, and Michael will gift you one of his books as a way of saying thank you. Just go to michaelyardneypodcast.com/review and let us know what you think. If you don't already subscribe, head over to iTunes or your favourite Android app. You'll find us there as Michael Yardney Podcast. If you'd like to gain instant access to the show notes, head across to michaelyardneypodcast.com. Watch out for our show next week. You'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes.